PBS Democracy Project.
WIPB-TV, the Muncie, Delaware County Chamber of Commerce, and the League of Women Voters present the 2nd Congressional District Forum. Your moderator is Steve Bell.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Indiana 2nd District Congressional Debate. I'm Steve Bell, Professor of Telecommunications at Ball State University. And I'm your moderator for tonight's debate. This debate is being co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters and by the Muncie, Delaware County Chamber of Commerce. Let's meet the candidates who will be debating the issues tonight. Their order of introduction has been determined by a drawing, and so has the order in which they'll be making their closing statements. The candidates are Bob Brock, Democrat from Anderson; Bill Frazier, Independent candidate from Muncie; and Mike Pence, Republican candidate from Edinburgh. We do not have formal opening statements tonight. We'll be going directly to the questioning. Before we open the questioning, let me share with you the rules agreed to by the three candidates. Now, questions will be directed to a specific candidate who will have 1 minute to respond. The other candidates will then have 30 seconds each to respond. Now, at that point, we can either move on to another question, or as moderator, I will have the option of encouraging the debate on the issue to continue. Our studio audience will have the opportunity to submit written questions to the candidates. We also have questions pre-recorded by several 2nd District residents. At the conclusion of this hour-long debate, each candidate will be given 2 minutes for a closing statement. For those of you in the television audience, this debate was pre-recorded on Friday, October the 13th. Let's begin our questioning now with Bob Brock, the Democrat from Anderson. And Bob, what one quality or issue do you consider so important that it makes you the candidate who deserves the support out there? A quality or a particular issue?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because without a doubt, my whole life has been taking not only my beliefs, but taking beliefs and putting them into action. And I think that's important. You just can't talk about your beliefs, you've got to put them in action. And I've done that in my life by serving my country in the United States Marine Corps, being a prosecutor and holding criminals accountable, by being a husband and father of 3, and going through what many people in this district do. The most important issue that I see on the horizon is how do we continue our prosperity in this country, and the way to do that, Alan Greenspan has agreed, and just this week Jane Bryant Quinn said so in the Star, is to pay off the national debt. And I am committed to doing that in Washington. That's the best way to help all Americans, and that's the best thing we can do, folks, to continue the prosperity of this country.
Bill Frazier, Independent candidate. One quality or issue that in your mind you'd say, hey, if for no other reason, here's the reason to vote for me.
Well, my experience serving in the Indiana State Senate gives me the legislative experience that neither of my other 2 opponents have. Being a very successful businessman and farmer, raising 4 children, I have 5 grandchildren. I can't take all the credit for that, but certainly we're real proud of them. And making sure that this country maintains a strong military. I have a son, as we speak tonight, somewhere under the North Atlantic Ocean in a nuclear attack submarine in the Navy. We all know about the recent tragedy that we had there. So the fact that I'm a father, a businessman, a grandfather, and a world of experience, and willing to put my own resources up to run this campaign.
And Mike Pence, same question. One issue or one quality that you have?
Thank you, Steve. And I want to thank WIPB and the local chamber and also the League for this wonderful forum. I'd Let me say quite honestly, I don't think I am possessed of any qualities that either of my two competitors don't possess. I'm equally committed to the issues that I believe in. I was born and raised here in the 2nd Congressional District, but for the vagaries of redistricting, would have lived my entire adult life in this district. But I think, Steve, what makes me unique is that I believe that I truly do best represent the values of the people of the 2nd District of Indiana. People who believe in limited government, less taxes, people who believe in a strong military and that military has been cut, and people who believe in traditional moral values like the right to life. So it's simply for the reason that I believe I personify in many ways the values that Congressman David McIntosh brought to this district in Washington, D.C., that I would be the choice.
Several of the questions that have already come up from the audience obviously deal with the Middle East and the current crisis that faces the people of Israel, the Palestinians, and in many respects, our government and our country. Under the general heading, what would you do to help bring peace to the Middle East? And let's start this time with Bill Frazier.
Well, number one, we wouldn't be involved as heavily as we are in the Middle East if this country has had an energy policy. I wrote a paper in 1976 asking to let's establish the energy independence of the United States of America. We have failed in that miserably, and I'm very disappointed. We're over there essentially for oil. Now, we should protect our friends to a degree, but let me say that it's not in our interest to shed our youngsters' blood, our servicemen and women, to settle every dispute that occurs around the world. So had we had a energy policy where this country had been energy independent, we probably wouldn't be as heavily involved in the Middle East today.
Mike Pence?
Clearly, Steve, every citizen in the 2nd District in Indiana is deeply concerned about what may be the beginning of the 9th Arab-Israeli conflict since 1948. What a congressman from this district could do to foment peace, I think, would be two things. Number one would be to pray. We're called to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and as a Christian who believes that we need to stand by Israel, I'd do that. But in public policy, I also believe that the United States of America needs to make an unwavering commitment to Israel. There's a lot of talk these days about the U.S. needing to be an honest broker, needing to be fair to all sides. Well, I submit to you that our relationship with Israel is precious and it's unique. And the heart of the American people says that we stand by Israel. This administration was wrong, Steve, when they failed to veto the one-sided UN Security Council measure that came out a week ago. We need to stand by Israel, and as a partner with Israel, work for peace.
Bob Rock.
Well, I think what we need to do is, number one, maintain a strong military in this country. And we need to continue our presence around the world, including the Middle East. We've been there for many years, and we need to help get these people back to the table and help encourage them to stop the violence. I think the current administration has been a leader in that area, and I think President Clinton and Al Gore are experienced and are capable in leading us and bringing these people back to the table. And with our strong military presence in the area and with their leadership, that's the way to bring these people back to the table to end the violence in the Middle East.
If I could just ask a couple of follow-up questions here in view of the national scope of this issue and the fact that the presidential candidates have also commented on it. Mike Pence, in the last presidential debate, George W. Bush gave his wholehearted support to the administration and chose not to give any criticism. I read a quote in which you were critical of administration policy, and I'm wondering if you would talk to that.
Be happy to. I believe that Governor Bush has taken the appropriate position running for President of the United States. America at this time should speak with one voice, particularly following the tragic events aboard the USS Cole, the loss of American lives in the Middle East. America needs to have a united front. But I'm not running for President of the United States. I'm running for Congress. And I believe that as a person who would like to represent a part of this country in the national government, that I ought to be willing, and I am today, to speak out when I think the administration, even an administration of my own party, is on the wrong track. Clearly, the peace process is on the wrong track. The peace process sought by the Clinton administration that even involved having political operatives become involved in internal domestic elections in Israel has gone awry. And it's no further evidence than the war that we see fomented there now. We need a strong U.S. partnership with Israel to bring about a lasting peace and to build coalitions the way the last President Bush did in the Middle East.
Bill Frazier, you seem to express a view that the U.S. is too committed, too involved. What would you do to pull back in some way from the U.S. role in the Middle East at the present?
Well, again, I will restate what I said earlier. We wouldn't be there if it weren't for oil. And let me
But we are there.
We are. That's exactly right. Now, we're hearing the rhetoric that we heard in Anderson, Mr. Pence knocking the Democrats, Mr. Rock blaming the Republicans. They're both at fault. We shouldn't have this situation in the first place. And that's one reason that I'm an independent candidate. We need to start taking these things very seriously. Let me just slip this up here. What are we going to tell mom and dads of 17 service people? As you can see, this is my eldest son, who is in the United States Navy, as I just indicated earlier. Thank heavens he wasn't on that boat. What are we going to tell them about their sons and daughters that are no longer living? I mean, this is a serious business, and we're going to have to address it seriously.
Bob Rock, in the last presidential debate, there was talk about nation building. The concept that the U.S. or the United Nations or NATO might intervene where countries have government repression or they have internal genocide or something, and we would go in the role of trying to help create democracies. And Vice President Gore was identified with nation building. What's your position?
Well, my position is, number one, we have a duty. I think we all have to recognize that this is the most powerful country in the world, and I think with that power comes a duty. And when there are troubled spots around the world where genocide, as you gave the example, occurs within a country, I think we have a duty to go in there and try to help the people that are suffering at the hands of the oppressors. It's not only our Christian duty, it's our moral duty from whatever religious base we have. But we've got to be very careful about the missions that we get involved in. The military needs to know the clear-cut mission that they're involved in, the length of that mission, and what the objective is. And the problem when you get into a lot of these types of actions are you can get into some very gray type areas with the orders to our military leaders, and that's the one thing that the military, one, has to have the training for it, and the political leaders need to make sure that we have clear-cut objectives before we go into these areas.
Because of the obvious importance of this issue right now, I just want to make one more point. Mike, you mentioned the whole process of the U.S. as an honest broker. This current administration has felt the need to not only support Israel, but at the same time to retain a credibility that will allow it to be an honest broker between the two powers. Bob Rock, would you give up? Would you in any way change the role of the U.S. as an honest broker or seeking to be an honest broker in the Middle East?
No, I think the U.S. needs to be involved there, and I don't think we're there just because oil. I mean, this is where three major religions in the world converge in Jerusalem alone. It's been an area where conflict has developed for many years, and it's in our interest to keep conflict down all around the world, and I think we need to be a presence there. I think the world expects us to be there, and I think they expect us to help try to resolve the conflict, to end the violence, and try to get these people back to the table.
Bill?
Well, whose blood is being spilled there? I mean, death is pretty final. And we've got 17 dead military personnel that we know of tonight. And I think we're going to have to be a lot more serious about where we commit our young men and women. I served as an airborne infantryman, you know, the cannon fodder, if you will. On the front lines is where I would have been had I been called to combat service. So, I mean, this is a very, very serious matter. I certainly want to help people if we can.
Would you change the role of the U.S. as an honest broker?
Well, an honest broker. I mean, we certainly have not been very successful there and in Somalia and other places in the world. We're going to have to understand that sometime we're going to have to say, folks, you folks in other lands are going to have to do the best you can to solve your own problems, especially when it comes to spilling American blood for that. So I'd be very reluctant to support it.
Mike Pence, any follow-up?
I think the policy has to change, Steve. I really believe in my heart that the relationship between the United States and America and Israel is unique. We planted this nation back in her historic homeland in 1948. That has never happened before in human history. And ever since that time, until the present administration, we have always stood as an unwavering partner of Israel, reaching out with integrity and with sincerity to broker peace in the Middle East, but always making sure all the parties know we are on Israel's side of the table. I believe Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has been wrong in moving us into more of a refereeing role when maybe perhaps the United Nations ought to play that, quite candidly. The United States ought to say, we're here to deal honestly and to deal fairly, but we're here with Israel, and that's where we should stay.
I've got something to add to the mix there. I think, number one, you have to realize that there's many Islamic people who now are citizens of our country. And maybe when we started back in 1948 and Israel began back at that time period, I think the mix is more complicated, and we have to have a responsibility I think, to both sides there and try to bring both of them back to the table. These problems are extremely complex and they're not easy to resolve overnight, and there's going to be bumps in the road like we've got now, and I think the administration's attempts at getting these resolved has borne fruit, at least in Yugoslavia, where we finally have seen the end of Slobodan Milosevic. So you've got to just keep trying all the time on these problems.
This is a subject, obviously, we could spend the entire debate on, but I want to move on now, and I'm turning to questions from the audience. And first of all, what should U.S. policy be toward gays in the military? Mike Pence.
I believe that rebuilding the military must, and by definition should, be the top priority of the 107th Congress. And if I have the privilege of serving the 2nd District in Washington, D.C., I'll make it my top priority. We not only need to provide more resources into the military, Steve, but we need to end an era of failed social experimentation where the left in this country has used our military to advance domestic social agendas. The don't ask, don't tell policy has been, by all accounts, at the Pentagon, a complete failure. There is a call to change it by simply eliminating any restrictions whatsoever. The real answer, as Congressman Steve Booyer said as the chairman of a House Armed Services Subcommittee after a detailed examination, and this is not a comment on morality at all, but homosexuality and homosexual behavior is incompatible with military service. We simply need to end this social experimentation. We also need to end, quite candidly, the gender integration in basic training, the assignment of women to combat support units and ultimately into harm's way. I believe that we need to once again, and the USS Cole, as Bill has eloquently stated, serves as a grim reminder that we live in a dangerous world. We have to make a commitment to our military and end all this social experimentation.
Bob Rock.
When I was a captain in the Marine Corps, one of the last, and I was in before the policy changed, one of my last duties was the discharge of a young man who was a homosexual. I was in the Marine Corps. I think the Marine Corps is probably the finest fighting force in the world. No offense, Bill, I know you like the paratroopers, but I'm a Marine and we always stick up for the Marine Corps. gays in the military do not belong there. I was in when the policy was changed towards the end of my service. It was terrible for the morale at the time. I think it was a bad policy, and I do not support it.
Bill Frazier.
The military is not a grandiose social experiment. The military is an institution that is made to break things and hurt people. That's what it's for, unfortunately. Until humankind can get along better, that's what it needs to be. Now, my last assignment, it was head of a chapel section in the 82nd Airborne Division. And by the way, I used to train Marine paratroopers. My job was to, these people who were of that sexual orientation were assigned to my unit until they were discharged from the military. Now, I've lived in the field, months at a time, and I certainly would not want...
We need to watch our time. Go ahead and finish your sentence.
Right.
But
I certainly wouldn't want to be spending time with a homosexual in my pup tent. And number two, then my answer to the question is there should not be homosexuals in the military, period.
Turning to domestic issues, what is your opinion on the privatization of Social Security, especially with the recent decline of the stock market? Bob Rock.
I think it's by and far one of the most important issues, and it's a terrible, wrong move for America. It's a wrong move for our senior citizens. The cost of it that the Republicans don't talk about, there's a $1 trillion cost to moving dollars out of the Social Security Trust Fund into the privatization. In addition to that, it jeopardizes the level of benefits that will be paid. And in addition to that, they've proposed raising the ages for our seniors. And many people just don't have the time and are not equipped to study up on the stock market and read over portfolios to make a decision on which stock they're going to buy today. It's a wrong move. It's a step in the wrong direction for Americans. We need to keep the promise of Social Security and have an add-on instead of that program where people can invest with an add-on retirement benefit instead of taking away from the trust fund.
Mike Pence?
The answer that Al Gore and my Democrat opponent have in this regard is just to spend more money, but they ignore that the Social Security system is in trouble. Right now, according to every expert, 4 American workers support every 1 Social Security recipient. By the year 2020, when my generation, the baby boomer generation, Steve, starts to retire, there will be 2 workers in the workforce supporting every 1 person on Social Security. We only have a few choices. Number 1 is to greatly raise payroll taxes to pay the benefits, to cut benefits. Neither one of those things are acceptable. The only other option we have, in my view, Steve, is to make the resources and the payroll taxes to Social Security work harder. Now, I believe that allowing Americans to take 2% of their payroll taxes, invested in one of a few very, very safe stock market funds, is very appropriate, very prudent. It would be a choice. Americans who want to stay in the system can stay right there. But this would give folks an opportunity for a much, much higher return on investment, and it's an idea whose time has come.
Bill Frazier.
As the only candidate here on the platform that is now eligible for Social Security, my position should be obvious. I relate it like if you're going to build a farmhouse. You build a new farmhouse, and then you start taking boards off of that farmhouse to build a fence. Well, that's what we're doing with Social Security. Social Security money should be there for Social Security, period. Should be protected. And that's precisely the position I would take. The people have trusted the government for Social Security, therefore keep the money in the Social Security fund. Don't go spending it for something else.
Follow-up question. Mike Pence, what do you say to people who say, hey, you take that 2% out of what's going into the Social Security fund, and it's going to go broke sooner?
It's a fair question from a viewpoint of a government-driven system, but here's the reality of it, Steve. In the last 40 years, the dollars that our parents and our grandparents have invested into Social Security have given them an average of 2.13% return on investment. Well, I know you go down to the bank here in Muncie and turn 3% in a passbook savings account. reality is Social Security has been, in so many ways, a poor return on investment for American taxpayers. During the same period, the same 40 years, according to the Standard & Poor's 500 index, the stock market has grown at a rate of 12% per annum. I think we just ought to harness a small piece as an option to Social Security recipients in the future. We ought to harness some of the energy of the most powerful economy in the world to keep those promises to senior citizens.
Bob Brock, what do you say to the critics who say, hey, the system's going broke and all you want to do is put more money into it, make a government program bigger, more out of the taxpayers' pockets?
Well, what we need to realize is, number one, the way to take advantage of the stock market is by adding on to the system, not by cutting money out of the trust fund. And that's the problem with the Republican plan. And Mr. Pence a few minutes ago said the Democrats would spend more money, but the truth is it would cost $1 trillion to go this way that they have proposed to privatize Social Security, and it would cost more money to administer. And guess who'd be the administrators? Stockbrokers, insurance people, and those kind of people. And it costs a lot more to administer the system that right now is administered at a very fair price to the taxpayers. And I think the prudent thing to do is to protect Social Security for all Americans and keep the promise that was made early on and add and enhance the system, but not take away from it. And the number one way to make it last is to pay off the national debt, and that'll make it safe long into the future until 2050. That's the best way to do it, because the savings off of our annual budgets will go into the trust fund and protect it for all of us, and that's the way we should do it.
Bill?
Well, yes, here we go again. It's the Democrats' fault. It's the Republicans' fault. I frankly don't trust bureaucrats with all of these extra dollars to spend. Let's lock up these funds and make sure that Social Security is going to be there as it was guaranteed to be when people reach retirement age and expect it. That's a contract they have with their government, and that's one contract that I would make sure that our government lives up to. Now, I don't mean that I'm not receptive to other programs for younger people. Certainly, we're going to have to introduce some of those into the system down the road. But as it stands now, I am not willing to entrust these funds, as we have been doing with the Democrats and Republicans over the years, for spending it for other reasons.
Moving on to another topic area. What is your position on RU-486? Now, this is the drug that can induce an abortion very early in the first term, as I understand it. Mike Pence.
I admire the fact that this district, and it may be unique in the entire country, is home to 3 candidates who have taken a strong stand for the sanctity of human life. I've been a long-time advocate of the right to life, and believe that when Bill Clinton took office and promised that he would work to make abortion safe and legal but rare, that he has done precisely the opposite. By vetoing efforts to end the barbaric act of partial birth abortion, this president has demonstrated that there is no abortion that he does not believe should be legal. And the advancement of RU-486 in our culture certainly will not result in abortion being more rare. I simply believe that it's imperative that the 2nd District send to Congress a member of the Republican majority who will work with a pro-life Speaker of the House to move forward pro-life legislation. I grant my Democrat opponents pro-life views personally, but the day he becomes a congressman, he will vote, as he said before, for Dick Gephardt to be the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. Dick Gephardt, a supporter of abortion rights who would oppose any pro-life legislation in the House.
Bob Brock.
And Mike, you would vote for Dennis Hastert, who would give a $1.5 trillion tax cut to the wealthy, and in the prosperity that we've had in this country, and give away the surplus that we've had, and take away the prosperity that's been built by the Democrat administration since 1992 for all working Americans. And that's why I would vote for Dick Gephardt, because he's going to continue the prosperity by paying off the national debt and helping working families in this country. As far as RU-486, I don't support it. I'm pro-life. I think it's wrong. And that's my position on it.
Another question, another subject.
Sir,
Oh,
I-
I'm
I-
sorry,
I
I'm
would like
sorry.
to-
Well,
I know I'm quiet and independent, but I'm still here.
Hey, I'll be the first to acknowledge it. Yes,
Yes,
please.
now I'll respond. I'm pro-life, period. I think that I have been and always will be. Here we go again, taking shots at Dick Gephardt and Dennis Hatzert. I think it's time that someone represents the citizens and the people of this district. I do not have a political agenda. I have a people agenda, and that means the people who live in this district. And that's what I'm willing to do, is do what you send me to Congress to do. And I'm going to vote your wishes.
All right, let's take now, we mentioned earlier that we went out with our cameras and asked some members of the people who live in this district what questions they would like to ask. Let's listen to the first of those, and this question will go initially to Bob Rock.
As far as what are they doing as far as to bring jobs in? You know, more companies leaving out, like New Venture Gear, you know, they were laying off. And Warner Gear, you know, they left, half the jobs left. As far as what they're going to do as far as to bring more companies in to produce jobs for the community.
Number one, I think the best way to bring jobs into the community is not support trade agreements that are going to siphon more jobs out of the 2nd District of Indiana. We've tragically seen thousands of jobs leave Anderson and the Muncie area. We used to employ 22,000 people in the plants in Anderson, and now we're down below 9,000. So we cannot support trade agreements that are going to siphon jobs away from us here in a manufacturing-based economy in the 2nd District of Indiana, and I will not support those. Number two, we need to invest in education for our children, because if we give our children a world-class education like they deserve, they will be able to compete in the world economy. Businesses will want to come here and locate because they know their children will get a good education. Their employees will be happy to come here because they know they'll get a good education, and they'll have opportunity here in the 2nd District of Indiana. And that's the best way, I think. Those two things right there alone will go a long way to promoting and keeping jobs here in the 2nd District of Indiana.
Bill Frazier?
Well, as most of you have heard, I hope, some of my commercials, that I am very much opposed to the NAFTA trade agreements for the reasons that's just stated. I've gotten thousands and thousands of people telling me that they do not support NAFTA. Why does a political party, Republicans and Democrats, are the people who put that NAFTA agreement into law and into effect? It's been devastating to working families in this district. I have a newspaper right here, Shelbyville. They just lost a factory, Detroit Steel. It's going to cost the folks down there in Shelby County, it's going to cost them 17% more on their tax rate just because this plant moved to Mexico.
All right.
So that's got to be stopped.
Mike?
Steve, Muncie's been through a tough handful of years. It's been a time of transition from a few heavy industries that have supported many of the families here in Delaware County to a transition in the economy here. What I would do as a member of Congress from the 2nd District would be to continue what Congressman David McIntosh has done to bring real economic vitality to the city of Muncie, working hand in hand with Mayor Dan Cannon, who has a vision for this community, build in a diversified business community. Congressman McIntosh has worked tirelessly to bring federal resources, where appropriate, to Muncie that will stimulate economic development. I also, and I know my time is short here, would add that cutting taxes on small businesses and family farms, ending death taxes entirely, accelerating the cutting capital gains will generate economic growth, and Muncie and Delaware County and the 2nd District will be the winner.
Bob Rock, NAFTA was brought up and put down by one of your opponents.
Well, if I understand where you're moving, the one thing I would take issue with Mr. Pence is the fact that he supports free trade. I think he's out of touch with our district in that and has not seen the harm that these free trade agreements have caused in the Anderson and Muncie areas, this plant in Shelbyville that we're losing. Those type of agreements are devastating to our district, and if you understand our district and the heavy manufacturing that occurs here, you know they're bad for it. That's why he's out of touch with our district, and I think he ought to vote somebody into office like me who's grown up here, has lived here, and knows what it's like for the people in these plants and to have seen the loss and the harm that it's caused us in this district.
But how do you resolve this whole issue? Because a lot of the rest of the country is benefiting from NAFTA with new kinds of energy and new kinds of technology. And what can an Indiana afford not to move toward that high-tech type future?
My position is that I'm an advocate in Congress for the 2nd District of Indiana, and my job is to represent the needs of the people here. And the way I see it is these type of agreements have not helped us here. They may be helpful in California, they may be helpful in Texas, but they definitely have not helped us here in the 2nd District of Indiana.
Well, I'm a farmer, and NAFTA was supposed to do great things for farmers. I hold in my hand my weigh ticket for a load of corn I took in a couple of days ago, and this, my net loss was 2 cents a bushel. I sold my corn at a loss. NAFTA is not working. I worked at Warner Gear, Chevrolet, and Indiana Glass, and I know what it is to lose a job when you're trying to raise a family, and it's not pleasant. And both political parties, Democrat and Republican, have supported these trade agreements, and they want to expand them. And the only way we're going to stop this is finally elect someone who really wants to represent people, and that is Bill Frazier.
Mike, you're being taken on 2-1 here. You get the last comment.
Well, as both of my competitors have rightly described, I do support free trade. Stand strongly with Congressman David McIntosh on that issue, and I believe it's just about the only thing President Bill Clinton's ever done that I agreed with. The reality is my opponent on the Democrat side of the table is a little bit conflicted in his message, it seems, Steve. On one hand, he describes the unbounded prosperity, in his words now, that was built by the Democrat administration. And yet somehow the 2nd District, we are told, is a pocket that prosperity hasn't reached. The truth is, in the 2nd Congressional District, we are at virtually full employment. Has there been transitions? Absolutely yes. Have they been painful at times? Yes, they have. Bill, I have to tell you that I lost a job when my wife, who's with us tonight, was pregnant with little Audrey, who's here tonight and is 6 years of age. And I know how tough that is on families and how frightening it is. But I would submit to you, the right course is not to turn back the clock to close our borders, but to recognize, as farmers do and as so many manufacturers do here in the 2nd District, that trade means jobs. And it means jobs right here in the 2nd District.
We have to have jobs that's more, we're talking, we lost $18 an hour jobs. Sure, we've got full employment if you want to sell hamburgers for $6 or $7. That's the issue I'm speaking to. And you're not going to get this problem solved if you send people to Washington who are going to be restrained by their party leadership. They're going to be told what to do, and that's expand these trade agreements and further hurt people who live in this district. And that's exactly what I'm opposed to.
Another subject. Should we sanction oil and gas exploration in Alaska and the Arctic? Mike Pence.
I believe that the goal of energy independence must be a top priority at the national level over the next 10 years. We simply must move toward energy independence, and where it's prudent, relevant to our environment, Steve, I believe that we must begin to explore not only in the Arctic region of this country and Alaska, but also with offshore drilling. Of course, my Democrat competitor's nominee, Al Gore, is virtually and utterly opposed to exploration here in the North American continent. He also, with regard to energy, has supported the Kyoto Treaty, the global warming treaty, which was rejected by a 95-0 vote. Almost everyone in his own party said that it was wrong to make the United States and our energy resources bear the burden that China and other major powers were accepted from. I simply believe that the goal of energy independence has to be done with an eye toward the environment, but also with an eye toward a rational view of science and an appropriate balance of what we expect from our economy and what we expect from our competitors.
Bob Rock, it was your president that got criticized. You got the next shot.
Well, I find it somewhat ironic that Mr. Pence has talked about global warming. He has written an article where he thinks global warming is a myth. I think that demonstrates how far right he is in his beliefs. Even Richard Lugar believes that global warming is a problem that needs to be addressed. He's out of touch with Richard Lugar and his own party. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is a very delicate environmental area. Before anybody goes in there, they should study the type of impact that would occur, and if there's going to be a negative impact, it shouldn't be done, because from what I understand, the oil reserves there are not that great. It's a small amount of oil that's known there, but it's not enough to go in and ruin one of the treasures of our environment in this country, and I think we need to stand up and protect our environment when we can.
Bill?
Well, what we need to do in this country is to have alternate sources of energy. There's abundant examples of that: wind, geothermal, biomass. The list goes on. I've read reports where this country has over 200 years of petroleum in the ground today. It's been decades since we've built a refinery here. It's been, with the environmental regulations we've had, is the reason we're paying $1.50 for gasoline. Now, if we want to pay $4 or $5 a gallon for gas, then follow the programs that the Democrat Party and the Republican Party want to advance. But if you want to get down to the business of solving the problem, elect someone who will look the issue straight in the eye and do something positive about it.
Mike?
Steve, if I may, my Democrat opponent tries to place me on the extreme by saying global warming is a myth. The reality is there is a growing number in the scientific community who are questioning, not just questioning, as scientists are called to do, some of the theories about global warming, the erosion of the ozone layer. I just presume my Democrat opponent then supports the global warming treaty endorsed by Al Gore that would drive energy costs in the United States through the roof and would be built on far less than consensus in the scientific community. That's something I didn't know and pleased to learn tonight.
You certainly got an answer, an opportunity to respond to that.
Well, your assumption is based on just that speculation, because I have not agreed to the Kyoto Treaty or any of its terms, and that's something I would study before I'd make that decision.
Well, if I believed that global warming was real,
but it is a
I would
reality.
support the
It
treaty.
is a reality that in the scientific community, it's accepted that global warming is a problem. It's not, as you have represented to these people, that it's doesn't exist.
Well,
you are
my view is,
you're
if I
simply
believe-
reading, I don't know, voodoo scientists.
If I believe, no voodoo involved, Bob, if I believe that global warming was real, by gosh, I'd support Al Gore on this.
Well,
but I think the jury's
it's
out.
funny that the
I think we should wait
scientific
for the
community accepts it as a problem, and even Richard Lugar in your party, who I'm sure you would say is a good person who thinks things through, has accepted it as a problem that needs to be addressed by our government.
Richard Lugar voted to reject the Kyoto Protocol along with 94
That's
other
not what
members
we're
of the
talking
Senate.
about. We're talking about global warming.
Gentlemen, this is great fun,
you
but
Well,
Trying to get it straight.
ladies and gentlemen, the good news is that you have a choice here. That's why I'm here. I'm an independent. And if you want these issues resolved instead of all this political back and forth, elect Bill Frazier to Congress.
I'm pushing you because I want to get to one more question from one of our the people that we met out in the district.
Okay.
So let's give a listen to another question.
I need to know, if possible, their position in supporting the continuation of the community policing COPS program within our communities that's put the extra police officers on the streets in our community and has helped lower our crime rates. And the program is getting ready to expire, and it will have dramatic effects upon our communities. And I just need to know everybody's opinion regarding that program.
Let me just give a little further explanation for people in the audience who may not be familiar. This is a federal program that provided money for local police departments to do special projects, develop special units, get new equipment, in some cases hire new people. And now the program is running out, and many police departments are saying they would have to fire people if the program's not renewed. Would you vote to renew it, Bill Frazier?
Yes, I would. We need a strong commitment to our peacekeeping officers. When I was a state senator, I drafted a bill that was a mandatory death penalty for anyone killing a policeman in the line of duty. So I'm a very strong advocate of helping our police and public safety people as much as I possibly can.
And I'm going to push for short answers here because we're getting near the point where we're going to have closing statements. Mike.
I would sit down immediately, Steve, with the leaders here in Muncie, including Mayor Dan Cannon and members of the City Council, as well as law enforcement officers, and ask if they would like that program renewed. If so, and it meant federal resources, then I would be willing to support it. If it meant more federal entanglement into local law enforcement, I might have some concerns and look for an alternative way to get those very same resources to Muncie law enforcement.
Bob Rott.
I'm proud to say that I've got the endorsement of the Fraternal Order of Police because of my strong background in law enforcement. I'm a former prosecutor, and I've also defended police officers in court. The crime rate in this country is the lowest it's been in 25 years, due to the leadership in Washington and the economic prosperity that we have. And I would definitely support community policing programs like the officer referred to. It's good for all of us, it's good for the community, and we need to keep the crime rate down and keep it going down.
This question should not be dealt with so shortly, but just to get it on the record, it's been discussed before, but not tonight, and we need short answers. What about tax cuts, specifically capital gains? Bob?
I think it's something we need to take a look at, a strong look at. It's something I'm definitely interested in moving that way and cutting the capital gains tax. But our number one priority has got to be paying off the national debt. And any tax cut that would defeat the purpose of that needs to either be brought in prorated over a period of time. But I would definitely support it as long as it does not defeat the purpose of paying off our national debt. Well, we have an opportunity to do that.
Mike Pence.
For 35 years, my Democrat competitors, a party controlled the Congress and ran up a sea of red ink, $5.5 trillion. The Republican-controlled Congress was the very first Congress in 4 decades to actually pay down on the national debt. Last year, $300 billion paid down on the debt. Right now, the Republican plan is to entirely eliminate the debt while we grow the economy through tax cuts by the year 2012. But we ought to get about the business of being as concerned about your family's debts as we are about the national debt. We need to cut taxes across the board, marginal rates. We need to get rid of death taxes altogether and strengthen families economically.
Bill Frazier?
Why haven't we done that? If these are things that need to be done, we've had a Democrat administration. We've had now a Republican control of the Senate and the House for some time. It seems like these issues just seem to come up on election time. But any time that Bill Frazier has an opportunity to cut taxes, you can believe he will do that. Now, the debt, the national debt must be addressed and must be paid down. Then we can get about giving folks real, meaningful tax cuts.
Gentlemen, we thank you very much.
I would like to just
Oh, yes. All right,
interject
Bob.
one
We
thing
just
here.
have a few seconds left.
Okay. Mr. Pence, I think you just simply misled this crowd when you said the Democrats incurred a $5.5 trillion debt and it's their fault. That's simply not the truth, and you shouldn't sit up here and say that to people. And I'm not laying blame where it occurred. It occurred because of the Cold War and all of our military engagements around the world. But was not the Democrat Party. And I want to add something else.
There's no time to add.
Just one point. In 1992, the Republicans had a $290 billion deficit. And because of the Democrats, we now have a $232 trillion surplus.
I've got to give you a shot back, and we're going to take it out of both of your closing statements because there's no other time to take it from. Mike?
My Democrat opponent may misapprehend the process. All spending bills in the national government originate in the House of Representatives, which was controlled by the Democratic Party during that same period for 35 years.
Okay, Bill Frazier, you're first with a closing statement, and you get your full 2 minutes.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I'll use the first second or two to say that Bill Frazier hasn't been party to what's been discussed about who created the debt and so forth. And Bill Frazier is going to take common sense to Congress if you folks choose to send me over there. I would be honored to serve you. Well, Mr. Pence and Mr. Rock represent the best that politics has to offer. What Bill Frazier has to offer is a common sense approach, an approach that is not a political agenda, but it's the people's agenda. I can listen to you and expect to listen to you, and you tell me what your feelings are. That's what a true representative is going to be. I'm not going to do as Mr. Pence suggested that he would do in our debate in Columbus, and if his conscience dictates goes one way on an issue and the people of the district goes another, he's going to follow his conscience. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to represent you. That's what you're electing a representative for, and that's what you can count on if you elect Bill Frazier. I know some people don't think that an independent can be effective in Congress, but we're not going to be, you're not asking to commit for 10 years. This is a 2-year office. Try me for 2 years. If you don't like it, fire me at the end of the time. I want your vote on November the 7th. Thank you very much.
Mike Pence.
Steve, thank you for hosting this event along with WIPB-TV, the local area chamber here in Muncie, and the League of Women Voters. Heartfelt thanks. I would be very grateful to have you consider voting for me in the upcoming November election, because I believe our nation is in need of renewal. And in this election, we have the opportunity to effect just that. We call it renewing the American dream. I believe we renew the American dream by cutting taxes on working families and small businesses and family farms so they can once again dream and build a better life for their children and grandchildren. We renew the American dream by rebuilding the military after years of reckless Clinton cutbacks. And we renew the American dream by taking a strong stand for the sanctity of human life, traditional moral values, and dignity in high office. I would be honored to have your support in the upcoming election. My name is Mike Pence.
Bob Rock.
Thank you. I want to thank you for having this forum. WIPB is one of my favorite channels. I watch it much at home. I think that this is an opportunity, and the question is, how do we continue the prosperity in this country? We are in the longest economic expansion ever of our country. So why we need a renewal, I don't know. I think we need to continue what we've done, and we need to continue on this path. We've got 22 million new jobs in this country, the lowest unemployment in 30 years, the highest home ownership rate ever. And the list goes on of the success of the times that we are in. And the best way to do this, that Alan Greenspan, and like I said earlier, is to pay off the national debt. And the reason why we need to have the Democrats in the White House and in Congress is because the Republicans have passed or want to pass a $1.5 trillion tax cut that will benefit the wealthiest Americans. That simply will defeat the purpose of continuing the prosperity in this country. A real tax cut is paying off that national debt. Each person owes $21,000 in national debt in this audience and at home. We've got to continue the prosperity of this country by paying off the national debt and making Social Security safe, passing the Patient's Bill of Rights, and protecting people's personal privacy. And those are the commitments that I'm going to take to Washington because I share the values of the people here in the district. I'm Bob Rock, and I'd be honored to have your vote on November 7th.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for participating in this debate tonight, and I must tell you that after having the privilege of moderating 2 of your debates, I am very impressed with your willingness to take part in this aspect of the democratic society, which is not always the easiest thing to do. And all 3 of you have very willingly given yourselves to this debate process, and I certainly think it is one of the underpinnings of this democracy of ours. So we thank you, gentlemen, for participating in this debate and giving 2nd District voters an opportunity to better understand who you are and where you stand on the issues. And we want to remind all of you that PBS and WIPB-TV will be bringing you the final presidential debate. Now that's next Tuesday night, October 17th at 8 p.m. And tune in, will you? This is a most important election. There are so many issues that are outstanding, and this is a unique opportunity that you don't find in many other countries. And on election night, November 7th, PBS and WIPB-TV will be bringing you the latest returns, both locally and nationally, and we invite you to join us then for election night coverage. We want to thank the League of Women Voters and the Chamber of Commerce for sponsoring this televised debate, and our special thanks to all of you in the audience for your participation in the democratic process, a democratic process that is of utmost importance to the future of our nation. Good night.
This Democracy Project program was made possible by a grant to PBS from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
This program is part of the PBS Democracy Project.